Have you ever wondered why understanding web application architecture is crucial for developers? Well, let's break it down. Web application architecture lays the groundwork for how an application functions, dictating its behavior, performance, scalability, and maintainability. It's like the blueprint of a building, providing a structured plan for the application's development. Two common types of architectures are the N-tier and layered architectures. Each of these design patterns has its unique characteristics and benefits, and understanding them is essential for efficient and effective application development. So whether you're developing a simple blog platform or a complex e-commerce site, the architecture you choose can make a significant difference. It's not just about coding, but also about how the code is structured and how different components interact. Now that we've established the importance of web application architecture, it's time to dive deeper. So strap in and get ready to delve into the fascinating world of web application architectures. Let's start by exploring the N-tier architecture, a popular design pattern in web development. This architecture divides an application into multiple layers or tiers, each with specific responsibilities. The most commonly seen N-tier architecture is the three-tier architecture, which includes the presentation, business logic, and data storage layers. The first layer is the presentation layer, the user-facing side of the application. It's responsible for handling user interactions and presenting data in a meaningful, understandable format. Whether it's a web interface or a mobile app, the presentation layer processes user input and renders the necessary data. Next up, we have the business logic layer. This is where the application's core functionalities live. It's the layer that handles data validation, coordinates processes, and enforces the business rules that dictate how the application behaves. Acting as a bridge, the business logic layer communicates between the presentation layer and the data storage layer. Lastly, the data storage layer is in charge of storing, retrieving, and managing data. This layer encompasses databases, file systems, and any other mechanisms used to store data. It's responsible for ensuring data integrity and providing a reliable source of data for the rest of the application. But how do these layers communicate? In N-tier architecture, communication flows in a linear direction, starting from the presentation layer, moving to the business logic layer, and finally reaching the data storage layer. This model ensures each layer is loosely coupled, meaning changes in one layer don't directly impact the others, promoting flexibility and ease of maintenance. So you see, each layer in the N-tier architecture has a distinct role, and they all work together in harmony. The presentation layer interacts with the user, the business logic layer processes the data, and the data storage layer ensures that data is safely stored and retrieved. By dividing responsibilities in such a manner, N-tier architecture allows for a clean, organized, and efficient design. As you can see, each layer in N-tier architecture plays a vital role, working harmoniously to deliver a seamless user experience. Now, let's shift our focus to another commonly used design pattern, the layered architecture. Layered architecture, akin to an onion with its nested layers, divides an application into several layers, each having a distinct function. It doesn't enforce a strict number of layers, but rather encourages a separation of concerns and modular design. Let's peel back these layers and see what each one does. First, we have the presentation layer. It's like the shopfront of your application, focusing on user interaction and interface design. It's where your user interfaces, controllers, and view models live, all working together to create a seamless user experience. Next, we have the application layer. Think of it like the shop manager, orchestrating the flow of information and actions. It contains application-specific logic and business rules and serves as an intermediary between the presentation layer and the domain layer. The domain layer, or business logic layer, is the heart of your application. It encapsulates the core business logic, rules, and entities. It's like the engine room of a ship, driving the application's functionality. Finally, we have the infrastructure layer. This layer is like the backstage crew at a theater. It manages technical concerns such as data access, external services, and communication. It includes components like databases, external APIs, and data access objects. In terms of communication, each layer talks to its adjacent layers, with dependencies generally flowing in a top-down direction, from the presentation to the infrastructure, and vice versa. This allows for a high degree of modularity and separation of concerns. In a layered architecture, each layer is like a player in a well-rehearsed orchestra, playing its part to perfection. Changes in one layer are less likely to disrupt the others, ensuring a robust and scalable application design. In a layered architecture, each layer has its own set of responsibilities, working together to form a well-structured application. You might be wondering, what's the difference between N-tier and layered architectures? Well, let's dive into it. At first glance, N-tier and layered architectures might seem quite similar, given that they both divide applications into separate layers. However, the devil is in the details, and these two architecture patterns have their unique characteristics. For starters, N-tier architecture typically has a fixed number of layers, often 3. Yet in layered architecture, there's no hard and fast rule about the number of layers. While both architectures promote separation of concerns, layered architecture emphasizes modularity and flexibility, allowing developers to add or remove layers as required. Communication between layers is another area where these two differ. In N-tier architecture, communication flows linearly from the presentation layer through the business logic layer to the data storage layer. Conversely, in a layered architecture, each layer communicates with the ones directly above and below it. This results in a bidirectional flow of dependencies, from the presentation layer to the infrastructure layer and back again. Moreover, N-tier architecture's layers are loosely coupled, meaning changes in one layer don't directly impact the others. This contributes to better maintainability and scalability. On the other hand, layered architecture, while also promoting loose coupling, places a stronger emphasis on the separation of concerns, aiming to make each layer as independent as possible. When it comes to use cases, N-tier architecture is often the go-to for larger, more complex applications, where the separation of responsibilities into distinct tiers aids in managing complexity. Layered architecture, with its flexibility and modularity, is well suited for applications where the requirements might change over time, or for smaller applications where simplicity is key. In conclusion, while both N-tier and layered architectures aim to organize an application into distinct layers, they each have their unique approaches and strengths. It's up to you, as a developer, to decide which architecture suits your project best based on your specific needs and constraints. Although they may seem similar, N-tier and layered architectures each have their unique characteristics and applications. So, what are the key takeaways from our discussion on web application architectures? Let's dive back into the key points of N-tier and layered architectures. Both are design patterns used in web application development and are divided into distinct layers or tiers, each with its own responsibilities. In the N-tier architecture, the three most common layers are the presentation, business logic, and data storage. The presentation layer is where user interactions are handled and information is presented. The business logic layer houses the application's business rules, logic, and processing. Finally, the data storage layer manages all matters related to data storage, retrieval, and persistence. Communication flows linearly from the presentation layer, through the business logic layer, and down to the data storage layer. Layered architecture, on the other hand, doesn't strictly enforce a specific number of layers. It emphasizes the separation of concerns and modular design. Similar to the N-tier architecture, it includes a presentation layer focusing on user interaction and interface design. The application layer contains application-specific logic and business rules, and the domain layer encapsulates the core business logic, rules, and entities. Lastly, the infrastructure layer manages technical concerns such as data access, external services, and communication. Communication in this case flows between adjacent layers, with dependencies generally flowing in a top-down and bottom-up direction. Understanding these architectures, their layers, responsibilities, and communication patterns is crucial in web development. But equally important is knowing when to use each architecture. For example, if you're developing a large-scale web application that requires a clear separation of concerns and high scalability, N-tier architecture might be the best fit. This architecture allows each tier to be developed and maintained independently, which can simplify the development process and make the application easier to scale. On the other hand, if you're working on a smaller project or one that requires a more flexible and modular approach, layered architecture might be a better choice. This architecture is less rigid in terms of the number of layers and their responsibilities, and it allows for a high degree of modularity and flexibility. Let's not forget that the best architecture for your application ultimately depends on your specific requirements. You should carefully consider factors such as the size and complexity of your project, your team's expertise, and your long-term maintenance and scalability needs. Remember, understanding web application architectures is a cornerstone in web development, and choosing the right architecture can make the difference between a successful application and a failed one. Keep exploring, keep learning, and see you in the next video.